Here we are, broadcasting live from London. My name is Chris Everard, and I have a special guest for the second hour of my show, which is Mr. Kev Baker. Kev, can you hear me?
I certainly can, Chris.
There he is.
It's a pleasure to be on with you tonight.
There he is. Now, whereabouts are you based, Kev?
I'm actually in Glasgow, Scotland, but I'm originally from up in the Highlands near Inverness, a small village called
it's lovely.
Augustus.
Yeah, I love Inverness. I've been to Inverleither several times. Now, in this second hour, what we are going to be discussing is Scottish mysteries, and I can tell anyone that if you go to Scotland, this is no exaggeration whatsoever, if you go for a walk in the countryside in Scotland, you are literally stumbling over megalithic, very ancient stone circles, standing stones, carved stones. There's ancient churches. The place is just teeming with mysteries, and it's a great pleasure to have you on, Kev, because, we never usually have enough time to discuss all these things. And what I've got my notes here. Today I've been jotting down a few kind of interesting aspects all to do with Scotland and this character who was a full-time black magician. I know there's people who don't like me describing him as a black magician, but that's exactly what he was. He was also a part-time spy for Her Majesty's Intelligence Services, and his name is Alister Crowley, and he was a chap he was a student at Trinity College, Cambridge, and that is the exact same college as Dr. John Dee, and Dr. John Dee this is in the 1500s. He was a mathematician. He was a map maker. That's a cartographer. And he was also somebody that had a black polished obsidian mirror, which apparently had come from, I think, the Aztec Indians. The Americas had only just been discovered at this time in history. And Dr. John Dee was somebody that used to spend all his days in his house summoning spirits. And all the aristocrats and members of the royal family used to come along and see Dr. John Dee and ask him, what can you see in your black mirror? And his mirror was made from a polished piece of obsidian rock. And in his diaries were actually discovered just recently, and I've been to see them. And you can actually see his black mirror. It's at the Science Museum. It's been stolen a couple of times and was returned. And Alister Crowley, back at the end of the 19th century, he went to the same college as John Dee had been there 400 years before. And Aleister Crowley modelled his entire life on the life of Dr. John Dee. In actual fact, Aleister Crowley claimed that he was the reincarnation of Dr. John Dee. And the interesting thing is that Dr. John Dee used astrology to choose the most auspicious date for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth I. He then went to Prague in Czechoslovakia, and he was hired by Emperor Rudolf of the Habsburg dynasty. These are the richest people on the continent of Europe, to make gold. And Dr. John Dee said, well, if we're going to get the recipe and do this alchemical transformation of metals into gold, then we're going to have to speak to spirits, and we're going to need spirits to actually tell us how to do it. And so he teamed up with a psychic who was a part-time criminal. His name was Edward Kelly, and he'd had the tops of his ears clipped, so he looked a bit like Spock, because he'd done some kind of misdemeanor, some minor crime. In those days, he used to chop your ears off, or part of your ears, make you look like Spock, so everybody knew that you were a criminal unless you wore a hat and had long hair. And this criminal and Dr. John Dee were working for Emperor Rudolf, and they wrote together a mystical alphabet called the Enochian alphabet, and they actually created an entire Enochian language. And then 400 odd years later, Alister Crowley, and this is where Scotland comes into it, Alister Crowley, excuse me, he buys a house called Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness, and he specifically buys the house to do a special ritual, and part of that ritual is in Hebrew, and part of the ritual is also in this so-called Enochian language. And by golly, this guy, Aleister Crowley, he was working for MI5 as a kind of part-time spy. He was so serious that he bought a house specifically to do black magic rituals. Now, Kev, am I right in saying that you've actually been to the graveyard that's actually near Boleskine House?
Well, I actually went back up to my old neck of the woods this summer, and I was in the grounds of the graveyard, and also we actually sneaked up, covert operation, so to speak, some guerrilla filming around the house, because we were aware that although there's Swedish owners right now, I believe they're Swedes anyway, there's no caretaker or anyone staying in the house. It's actually uninhabited. So we made our way up to the garden, myself, my partner, my brother and my son. And some of the stuff that I seen round on the far side, the kind of hidden side, Chris, it was unbelievable. It really was. There was pine cones in the garden, obviously to symbolise the pineal gland, I would suggest.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Even down across the road, I mean, it was rumoured when I was growing up that there was secret passages leading from the house down to an outhouse in the graveyard. Now, there is an outhouse there, and we're to climb up the wall to sneak in a window into the attic portion of it. And there's dated graffiti, and there's the symbols of Alister Crowley's Thelema magic. They're actually dotted all over the rafters of this building. Yes. And with it being dated, I would suggest that that site is still being used to this day for satanic purposes. And having grown up there, some of the stories and the myths that you hear when you're growing up, we all know that myths are loosely based on fact, and some of it would totally curl your hair, Chris. And we've mentioned before how it's quite... there's a lot of ley lines up that area.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And obviously with Loch Ness, that body of water said to be good for that sort of thing as well. Then Crowley definitely purchased that house with these things in mind. And he even went on to say in one of his books that one must have a house where proper precautions against disturbances can be taken. Yes. This being arranged, there is really nothing to do to aspire with the increasing fervour and concentration for 6 months towards obtaining the knowledge and the conversation of the holy guardian angel. Basically, he was describing getting the perfect location for casting his magic.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Now, what it is, I should have said this. He was born in 1875. He bought Boleskine House, I think, around 1899.
That's correct, Chris, yeah.
Yeah, and, 1899, 1900, this guy was trying to bring a new era, which he described as an aeon of chaos, death, and destruction. And after he bought Boleskine House, he went on, this long expedition. He went to China. He had his young wife. Her name was Rose. And, they ended up at Cairo. And 1904... basically, his wife sat bolt upright in bed, and she was in a trance. And he'd just been inside the Great Pyramid, and he just invoked all 72 demons that are described in this ancient text called the Goetia Book of Howling. It's meant to have been written by King Solomon about 900 BC. I don't know whether it really was written by King Solomon, but the book definitely describes 72 major demons in the lower astral realms, in other words, hell. 4 of them are the kings of hell. There's a prime minister called Lucifuge Rufacal, and in the Goetia book, it describes all of the ways that these spirits present themselves to you in your mind's eye under the influence of breathing in incense and all this kind of thing, and ritual bathing and fasting, which is what you do when you actually do a magical ritual. And that's exactly what Crowley had been doing in Boleskine House. Then he went to China. He went mountain climbing. He ended up at the pyramids. He invoked all 72 of those demons inside the king's chamber. Now, at the end of that book, and at the end of lots of books, lots of textbooks and kind of operation manuals about summoning these demons, there is a segment called the License to Depart. And that is a mini ritual which you're meant to do to dispel these demons. Once you've had your conversation with those demons, you're meant to cleanse the area. You're meant to cleanse the temple. Otherwise, the danger is that these demons stay with you. They speak to you in your dreams. They make you sort of make ridiculous bad decisions in your life. They put you off of your life path, and generally they possess you. In other words, your actions, your words, your thoughts aren't yours any longer. That's really clinically diagnosed as schizophrenia. Well, Crowley just walked out of the king's chamber without doing the license to depart. He turned the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau into a Pandora's box by summoning those demons. And this event, the buying of Boleskine House in 1899, the rituals that he did there, and then packing his bags and going off and invoking all these demons into the Great Pyramid, all of this led up to 1904, where he came back to the hotel room in Cairo, and his wife sat bolt upright, and she said, "They're waiting for you." And she started to dictate to him information from a spirit called Awas. Now, later on, Crowley actually admitted that Awas was Satan. And so his book, which became known as the Book of the Law, was actually dictated by Satan. So
couldn't make that stuff up. I mean, you even see his mantra, "Do what thou wilt," in common culture today by people like Jay-Z.
Yeah.
That's kind of all over his T-shirts and stuff like that. But I want to throw this one out to you because anyone at all who looks at Crowley must have come across the rumours that Barbara Bush is actually related to Crowley. Have you looked into any of that at all, Chris?
Yes, I have. It's not really an area that I've thoroughly investigated because I always prefer to go to the source. It's to do with the Pierce family. And let me just explain. What happened is that Libby, by the way, she's just sent me a message saying that Crowley had a house built about 6 miles from Bristol. This guy, Alister Crowley, was a full-time occultist. He had this place at Long Ashton, near Bristol. He had Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness. By the way, Loch Ness is, I think I'm right in saying it's about 20 miles long, Kev. Is that right?
26 miles long.
26.
I believe it's one of the longest bodies of water.
Amazing. And then what Crowley did, so he had this house at Long Ashton. He had the house, Boleskine House, on the shores of Loch Ness. Then what he did is he went to Cefalù in Italy, and basically he had a bungalow there, and he was there with one of his Scarlet Ladies, who was an occultist. I mean, these people were thoroughly diabolic. I mean, they believed in chaos, they believed in destruction. They had taken the black magic path in their lives. I know there's lots of pagans, lots of people who love Crowley and think he's a butterfly collector and he's nothing to do with the occult. But I can tell you now, the Book of the Law advocates the sacrificing of children, if it's not in the Book of the Law, it's in one of the other books which he wrote.
Is there not bestiality in there as well, Chris?
Yes, there's everything. There's
the sexualization of children.
Sexualization of children, absolutely.
You even see that emerging, though, in Common Core and education today. It's as if his doctrines are still on the go.
Well, they are, because Dr. Kinsey, who is like the author of modern-day social services and the policies of this kind of frontline psychology that goes into the social services. Kinsey, who actually masturbated children as part of his so-called research, was a Crowleyite, and he actually visited Crowley's house in Cefalù, it's near Sicily, in Italy. And, this is a temple, and the inside of the walls were painted with these gaudy, terrible images. And they were painted by Crowley and his American girlfriend, Scarlet Woman, who was really basically, she was playing the role of Babylon, of the whore of Babylon. And her name was Leah Herzig. And you can still see the graffiti on the inside of the walls of this bungalow. It's pretty ruined now, but exactly like you were saying, Kev, where there's still rituals going on at Boleskine House, there's still Crowleyite occultists going to the ruins of Crowley's temple in Cefalù, and you can see incredible things there. You can see they graffiti themselves. Leah is having sex with a goat, and she actually even did that. She used to put on sex shows with a goat, and who used to come along. There were all kinds of people, including aristocrats from the English aristocracy, who used to come along and actually watch these sex shows between Leah Herzig and the goats. And Crowley had sired several children. His children were walking around 5 years old, swearing and smoking cigarettes. And then all of that was not only allowed, but it was all part and parcel of this total era or aeon of destruction and chaos, which is what his Book of the Law advocates.
And didn't Jimmy Page go on to buy his house up in but the shore of Loch Ness as well?
Yeah, well, Jimmy Page, the guitarist of Led Zeppelin, he was previously to Led Zeppelin, he was in the Yardbirds. Jimmy Page has a kind of museum quality collection of Alister Crowley's memoirs, his books, personal belongings of Alister Crowley. I mean, it's a very serious lifetime kind of dedication that Jimmy Page has got. In an interview in Guitar Magazine, Jimmy Page actually mentions black magic and actually says that, it was kind of working for him, so he stuck with it. And you can see...
Why do you see so much of that stuff, Chris? Sorry to interrupt you, but why do you see so much of that stuff in the music industry?
Well, this is a very good question. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, obviously...
Are they just tapping into the popular meme? People like us talk about it, so it's good PR, it makes money? Or is there something more dark and sinister, which I personally feel it is?
I think it goes way back to the times of the birth of the blues and Robert Johnson. He was a cotton picker, and he was a talented guitarist. He came from, the culture of the African Caribbean slaves, and he had no money, and he decided to do a pact with the devil. And his pact was basically, make me famous with my guitar. And he took his guitar and he placed his guitar on the crossroads. I mean, crossroads are traditionally where magical rituals take place. The crossroads in the forest of where you get two paths crossing is where druids used to do their rituals as well. And he did this pact with the devil, and he did actually get a recording contract. And so I think there's been an element of the occult, and definitely an element of Satanism, not only in the popular music industry, but it's also a thread that goes through Hollywood as well. And it's very interesting that you bring it up, Kev, because Dr. Kinsey, who visited the temple of Crowley's temple of Cefalù, he didn't go alone. He was actually taken there by Kenneth Anger. And Kenneth Anger is one of these disciples of Alister Crowley. He's an American film director. He made quite a few films. One of them is called Lucifer Rising. And he's friends with the guy that has kind of invented, if you like, modern, I don't know what you'd call it, psychology, psychiatry, social services. You know, it's really sick.
It's a sick world we're living in these days, Chris. It really is. Just sitting here listening to you.
Yeah, it certainly is. So now, what I would like to say, Kev, is that you know, this whole area of Loch Ness is a fascinating area. It's not just Boleskine House. It's not just you know, the photographs of Loch Ness Monster. There are lots of megalithic stones that date back to about 2450, 2550 BC. So there's stones there which have literally been standing there for 4,500 years. Some of them have been standing there for a lot longer than that. And just generally, what I find when I go there is that there's a very kind of powerful energy of nature in Scotland.
Well, actually, growing up there in the Highlands, you don't feel it so much. But having been away from the area for so long now, when I do go home and visit, it's quite palpable. You're right, you can feel it. It's in the there's energy there somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, shall we talk a little bit about the royals and their links to Scotland?
Oh, definitely, yeah. My favourite people.
Now, a lot of the listeners, they've probably seen photographs of the entire British royal family dressed in Scottish traditional costume. The men are wearing kilts, they got sporrans, and they look very Scottish. What I have to say is that there is not a single drop of Scottish blood in any of those royal people at Buckingham Palace.
I think they'd be more suited to going over to Bavaria and the land probably where Count Dracula used to kick about. They'd have more ties to that geographical location, I would think.
Well, that's right. That's right. Their real name is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and they Coburg and Gotha, these are actual towns in Germany where they have huge land holdings. And Queen Victoria was married to Prince Albert Saxe-Coburg, and he spoke German, even though he was a British prince. He spoke German all the time.
Pictures of Prince Philip on Nazi marches.
Yes,
just at the Second World War. I mean, it's in your face. They don't even try and hide it, Chris.
Well,
you go down to Buckingham Palace. I visited there at the time of Bilderberg, and they're absolutely idolised by people. It's quite pathetic, really, when you look at some of the crowds outside and the way that they idolise that family sitting in there.
Yes, yes. I don't think that's happening so much nowadays. I think people do have a much more down-to-earth view of the monarchies around Europe.
See, it's one of my problems with independence, if we do get it up here, is we won't be independent from that mob because they'll still be coming up and wearing their kilts and exercising their power. So it's just independence light at very best will be.
Yeah, well, they do have a lot of properties in Scotland. The most famous royal properties are Edinburgh Castle. They also own a lot of the properties along a road called the Royal Mile as well. And then they also own Balmoral as well. Now, we have a break coming up. When we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by Kevin's colleague, and we're going to be talking about Scottish mysteries, and we are going to be discussing the Loch Ness Monster as well. So don't go away. Welcome back. We're into the last half hour of this special broadcast. My name is Chris Everard, and I'm broadcasting live from London. I have special guest, Mr. Kevin Baker, and we also are now joined by one of Kev's colleagues. How do you say your name?
Kip.
Kip. Nice to.
Or you can call me my Christian name, Chris, which is Craig, but Kip or Craig, whatever you prefer.
Okay, well, it's nice to be with you.
See what happened, Chris? The American accent ended up calling him Craig.
Oh well. There you go.
Frequency, that's
I'm sure some of our American cousins have problems with regional accents from Europe, but I
think our Scottish one goes down quite well.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's one of the more easier European accents for them to understand. I know American people tend to have a lot of problems with listening to Italian people speaking English. They tend to find that very difficult to understand. Now, during the break, I was just reading that Jimmy Page, the guitarist of Led Zeppelin, he bought Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness in 1971, and a childhood friend called Malcolm Dent, a childhood friend of Jimmy Page, was the curator of the property. He actually lived at Boleskine House for 20 years. He died, actually, in 2011. There is an interview with Malcolm Dent. I'm going to broadcast it on the Enigma channel over the next couple of months. If you want to sign up for a free account at the Enigma channel, you just go to enigmatv.com, fill in the little purple form, and we'll set up an account for you. This Malcolm Dent character, very, very fascinating guy. He actually saw chairs moving around inside Boleskine House all on their own. He also saw the rugs and the carpets piling themselves up into a corner of the room, all on their own. And also in this video interview that was filmed quite a few years ago, he said that the first night that he was there was some wild animal actually in the corridor outside his bedroom, a very big, heavy, wild animal. He doesn't know exactly what animal it was, but it was trying to break through the door. Now, he said that when it terrified him as well. When he woke up in the morning, obviously he was very scared to open the door, and he checked the entire house. And he couldn't actually see any kind of way that a wild animal could have actually got in there. And he came to the conclusion that this was some demon. It was some kind of animalistic kind of ghost. And, of course, the demons that are described in the Goetia Book of Howling, which is what Crowley invoked inside the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, many of those demons, when they present themselves in the mind's eye of the magician, they do have animalistic forms. They have, legs of spiders, claws of crabs, heads of cats. Some of them are riding horses. It's very, very weird stuff.
Well, Chris, I know one story from a group of decorators up in Fort Augustus who were commissioned to go and paint Boleskine House. They were staying overnight, basically, trying to get the job done, and they left the place I think it was by 5 in the morning, and they never spoke really about why they left, but they just upped tools and they were out of there. No questions asked. Whatever they seen or done, it was enough to scare these boys away. And these were hardy Highland guys, you know what I mean? So,
wow.
It's a scary, scary place.
Wow. Now, shall we talk a little bit about Sir Peter Scott and the Loch Ness Monster?
Either that, or I'd love to hear you and Kip getting into the Knights Templar in Scotland. Kip kind of gets into that aspect of things. I know you touched on that as well, Chris.
Absolutely.
So I'll actually take a back seat here and let you and Craig kind of get into this stuff, because it's going to be interesting to listen to.
Okay.
Cheers, Kev. I was listening to the show earlier on, and just to touch on what you were saying, Kev, why was the occultism so prevalent in music and pop culture? And I think we need to go... I think the answer lies in the time frame it happened. It was more bread and circuses that were handing out to the masses to keep them occupied. With, you had Vietnam, you had the Israeli War of '67 going on. You had so many social changes happening towards the late 50s and all the way through the 60s and 70s. And I think they used music, cinema, so on and so forth, using the occult system of control As you were even talking about, create chaos. I mean, it was sex, drugs and rock and roll back in the 60s, and it literally created enough chaos to prevent any social movement at the time getting traction to get the changes they wanted, because there was a lot of people around in the 60s that genuinely just wanted peace, and they had to disturb that some way, somehow, and it was, I believe, using the occult, sex, drugs and rock and roll, and the free will of man to corrupt it all. And then even going on to like you were talking about the beasts and whatnot. If you look at it biblically speaking, they talked about the beast 666 being the bear, the leopard, and the lion. Now look up and down the UK, even up in Aberdeen, the coat of arms for the city of Aberdeen is a leopard. And you only need to go up and down the country and you'll see the lion, the leopard and the bear turning up and as symbolism up and down this country on coat of arms for cities, football clubs, so on and so forth. Wow. And that's how entrenched it is in the UK, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say to all of our listeners in Canada and America is that there are no leopards ever that have lived in the UK as far as I'm aware. I don't think
quite a strange animal to choose, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, you also see the same thing in France as well. There's lots of symbology. It's all paid for, by the way, by the local taxpayers, where the local Freemasons and black magicians have put all the very similar kind of symbology into little villages all over France. And yeah, it's a misuse of public funding, obviously. Now, you guys, as far as the Templars are concerned, I know that the Templars and the Masons, because, Freemasonry and the Knights Templar are very, very much interlocked as two very strong brotherhoods. They used to do public marches, and the most famous one was they used to wear full regalia. If you want to do an image search on the internet, just type in Royal Mile Freemason, and you should find images, mostly from the 1950s, of Freemasons in full regalia walking in the public space.
I always like to frame it as the Freemasons aren't a secret society. They're more of a man's club, a society with secrets, because they've never concealed themselves as a society. They've always operated out in the open. It's what happens in their temples and goes on behind closed doors that has been the secret.
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously the thing about the Templars in Scotland is that the Templars started off in the south of France, and there was a kind of international intelligence ring being operated by the Templars between Scotland and France, and it was to do with the Scottish monarchy being at loggerheads being at loggerheads with the aristocracy that were based down in Eltham Palace, which is the hunting palace in southeast London. That was the main residence of the London-based royals. And, the thing is that Queen Elizabeth I, I think I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I think she was half-sister with Mary Queen of Scots. And Mary Queen of Scots was... Yeah?
I was going to say Mary Queen of Scots, his son, King James, I believe, was the first... This is where a lot of people think it was the English king that conquered Scotland. Well, it was more the Scottish king that was given the Kingdom of England. And it was King James, I think it was King James I for England, and I believe it was King James III for Scotland. I could be murdering that. That was the son of Mary Queen of Scots. And it just goes to show that people will argue about, like we were talking about the German royal family, being related to the current royal family being more German than British, and it's very much true.
Yeah.
But again, you need to go and look into these people are mongrels. The elite have been breeding like dogs for a long time. Go and look back at them. Around the time of the American Revolution, you had King George. Now, we've got George Square in Glasgow. They were going to put up a statue of King George, but they had to change it because a lot of people in Glasgow hated King George because he mucked up the tobacco trade. King George was the first king of his lineage that was actually born in Britain and sounded like one of the natives. He was a member of the Vatican Council. I can't remember the name of it, and he was also had a lot of titles in Hanover. He had more titles in Hanover in Germany than he did actually over here, although he was more accepted in Britain because he was the first king of his lineage that actually was born in Britain and sounded British rather than German.
Wow. Yeah. What I was going to say is that the Templars from the south of France actually went on a kind of European tour. Once they'd brought the ancient books of black magic, which included the Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Clavicule of Solomon, and several of these other texts from Palestine, they excavated an area near the Temple of King Solomon. That doesn't actually exist any longer. There was a new temple called the Second Temple that was built on that site, and now all that's left is the Wailing Wall, which is where they say in Judaic tradition that you can feel the presence of the big thing.
Well, Kip, we were looking at a story today on the BBC about walls and the Jews, weren't we?
Huh.
There was actually I think, Kip, you probably know more about this than me. You put a quick video out about it.
Wow.
Well, apparently there's a tradition that exists in Judaism which allows them to erect a wall, a symbolic wall around an area, which would then allow Jews to carry rucksacks and so on and so forth on the day of the Sabbath.
Yes.
And you even seen it, Kev. They were using the analogy of a kid's carrying an oxygen tank round on his back. Not to point out that if you let a religious practice get in the way of keeping a child alive, it's quite retarded in the first place. But it was just the mentality of putting up more walls, and whether they're and what was it, £350,000 it cost them to put up
Certainly
a wall?
Was, Kip. Yes, that's correct.
The walls, the walls you're talking about, they're actually symbolized by a kind of wire that goes around the actual Jewish designated area. And I think it's more than just where, they can go shopping and they can load their cars up and things like that. I think, I could be completely wrong, but I think it's something to do with within that area, Judaic laws are also concurrent with the law of the host country. I think it's more than just allowing people to do work, on their holy day. It's very interesting because those areas because those designated areas exist in all European cities. And it's interesting because just, excuse me, up the road from me, about 25-minute drive away, there is a 15th century ghetto, Jewish ghetto, inside this very ancient town. The town dates back from the 9th century. I live in a very ancient area. And in the 15th century, what they did, when I say they, I'm talking about the French aristocracy and the French royalty, they borrowed huge amounts of money from the Jewish families in that area, and then they didn't pay those families back. So what they did is they used that designated area as a prison for them. And in many areas of Europe, those designated areas that are, they have this symbolic border, which is just like a wire going around them, they became prisons for those Hebrew families. So to see that kind of thing going on, I mean, if I was in their position, I probably wouldn't repeat doing the same thing again, because let's face it, it was only 75 years ago that there was a master race ideology that was sweeping across many nations, and that ideology, where the most perfect kind of example of humankind was the Aryan with blonde hair and blue eyes, this was being funded by the Saxe-Coburg royal family. They are the same royal family as we have today sitting in Buckingham Palace. They are the same royal family that control the Netherlands, Belgium. Belgium actually gets all of its wealth from the Congo, which is a Belgian colony in Africa, which has the richest kind of source of diamonds on the entire planet. And obviously all the other monarchies of Europe, they're all interbred, like Kev was saying. And it's amazing, that the Duke of Edinburgh, I mean, to call him the Duke of Edinburgh, considering this man has not got a drop of Scottish blood in his body, people think he's Greek. He's not. He was born in Greece, but that doesn't really make him Greek. His parents were.
Was he not? Like Prince? There's pictures of Prince Philip attending a Nazi wedding.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure.
Yes. No, I think it was a funeral. I think it was a funeral. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's right. He's actually related to the Hesse family, and his brother-in-law was Prince Christoph. Prince Christoph was working for Hermann Goering, running the Nazi intelligence agency, and they had every single telephone throughout the Third Reich Empire tapped. It's rather like today's NSA, where, they're collecting 200 billion text messages a day and are following, tracking 5.9 billion smartphones. This is what the Duke of Edinburgh's brother-in-law was doing full time. And he was a royal prince. And Germany had many, many principalities. There were more than 200 royal princes who were affiliated or active members of the Nazi Party. And in actual fact, they were the funders of the Nazi Party. All of this, I cover all this in Feed Your Brain magazine.
Let's not forget Prince Philip has desires to come back and wipe us all out as a killer virus as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What a charming man.
Some of the things that idiot comes out with, it's unbelievable. He's comedy gold.
Yeah.
I think he's made a very good attempt of being a killer virus this time round, right?
I think you could be right.
Well,
there's definitely an argument to be made.
Yeah, I mean, all of his sisters married Nazis. How loyal are they? They all married Nazis. This is his sisters. And so his brother-in-law became Prince Christoph von Hessen. And they had a child. And do you know what they named the child? Adolf.
Yeah, I was taking a wild guess there as well. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, they named him Adolf. And he's still around today, except he calls himself Prince Andreas. And these people funded the Nazis. Why does this matter? Because, I give talks all over the planet, and I get people coming up to me and they say, that's interesting, I like what you were saying about this, that, and the other and everything. It's very interesting what you're saying about Marilyn Manson and Lady Gaga. As soon as I start talking about, what was going on 75 years ago, they say, well, why does that matter now? And I'll tell you why it matters, is because our grandparents had their houses bombed. And, I think it was something horrendous. I think it was something like 520 million homes were destroyed in a 5-year period between 1939 and the summer of 1945.
And how many royal palaces?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think there was minor damage on some of them.
St Paul's Cathedral also miraculously didn't get one scratch on it.
Yeah, well, there you
Chris,
go.
maybe you'll be able to clear this up. I've been looking in the past at Adolf Hitler, and I came across, I don't know if it was a rumour or disinfo, but that he might even be related to the Rothschilds.
Yes, that's right, because his parentage is a bit strange. We know who his father is. I mean, anybody that tells you that we don't know who his father is that's not true. It's his grandparents where it gets a little bit hazy. We don't really know exactly what the deal was. By the way, Kev, coming back to what we were saying just before the break, because we're almost at the end of the show, it's the Pierce family who visited the Cefalù temple near Sicily, and that is how these rumours have started. And it's something which I'm going to be investigating. Is Barbara Bush the offspring, or is she related in any way whatsoever to Alister Crowley?
But certainly on a visual inspection, nothing else. There's definitely a similarity there.
Yeah, there is.
I think there's a lot of timeline evidence as well, with when the pregnancy was conceived and where obviously I would need to take a long hard look at it, but I think there is some compelling things along the timeline, sort of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I'm gonna look closely into. Now, before we end the show, we must mention the Loch Ness Monster. You can't do a show about Scottish mysteries without Loch Ness Monster. What I want to say to everyone is that the Loch Ness Monster is only one of several deep lake monsters that are in existence around the planet. There's one in Denmark, and Denmark isn't that far from Scotland. There's one in Japan. Now there's another one. I think it's in Guyana. I'm not 100% on that. I'll have to double check my notes on it. So the Loch Ness Monster is not the only. Loch Ness is not the only big inland lake where there's meant to be monsters. Now,
certainly a lot of stories up my way about it. There's a St Benedictine Abbey up there. And you'd think that these monks would be trustworthy in their storytelling, and there was a lot of rumours that they had seen stuff. And I must admit, Chris, growing up there, the local economy relied so heavily on there being a Loch Ness Monster. Even if it was proven that there wasn't, we would have to maintain the kind of myth that there was.
That's true.
Personally, I've never seen anything. I've never met anyone. My mother has seen something under the water. If I had to hazard a guess at something, it's a deep, deep loch. Maybe a big, huge, giant sturgeon, something like that.
I see.
Possibly.
Well, I can say to all the listeners now, if you go to a search engine, and maybe you want to do it while I'm saying this, if you type in Loch Ness Monster, Sir Peter Scott, and you do it on a search engine that brings up images like Bing Images, you will see underwater photographs which were taken by a knight of the realm, Sir Peter Scott. He was a naturalist, he was an environmentalist, he was a very serious researcher. He managed to fund an underwater photography project. And I remember this, I was just a little boy, and he actually managed to photograph the Loch Ness Monster. And these photographs have been analysed by cryptozoologists and also biologists down at the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, and an expert in plesiosaurs, which is a species of dinosaur, came forward from the Natural History Museum in Kensington in London and said, that, sir, is a fin of a plesiosaur.
I suppose potentially, maybe during a shift of ice, could we say a plesiosaur maybe cryogenically was frozen?
That's right.
And then it maybe as the time and the temperatures rose up,
it got trapped.
It's been reanimated, yes.
Yeah.
I don't even think it would have to be trapped. I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's proven that Loch Ness has an underground tunnel to other lochs as well as the sea.
Probably. Probably.
So shrouded in mystery, Kip. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you only need to look at the facts. How many new species get found in deep, deep waters on an annual basis?
Many.
So there's still things to get found out there. Anybody who discounts it, I think's...
We can map the surface of Mars. We've sent a rover up there, but we don't know what's on the bottom of Loch Ness. It's quite ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah. Mind you, there is now, there's these satellites that they're measuring the depth of the ice caps, and they are actually X-raying the entire planet, and they're also using ground-penetrating radar. So the elite, the scientific elite, do know what's going on because it can see through water. And in actual fact, myself, I've done an aerial survey of Loch Ness using Google Earth, and amazingly I did see very weird things in the water, and I'll put up those coordinates on Facebook. Okay, thank you very much, chaps. That's the end of the show.
Been a pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll have you on as guests again. Everyone, it's been great. It's been a very, very good show. You can catch up with me at ChristopherEverard.com.